We're on the line today with Casey Fiesler. Casey is an associate professor at the University of Colorado Boulder in the Department of Information Science and researches and teaches in the areas of technology ethics, internet law and policy, and online communities. Also is a social media superstar. Casey, I think this is the third time that I've interviewed you for some sort of podcast project. So welcome back to my world of podcasting. It's great to have you.
Well, thank you. Always a pleasure.
And today, what we wanted to do and why we're talking today is because of various things that are going on in funding in academia today, but also because of a recent grant that you had canceled that we wanted to just tell the story of and broadcast some of what is really going on for academics and for groups who are doing really important research. And so we were thinking we could just dive right in and ask you, what's going on? What happened?
Sure. Well, coincidentally, given the general topic of your podcast, this grant that I had was on AI education. It actually was part of an explicit NSF call that came out, I think early last year around AI workforce development, through a dear colleague letter, and it was called the Educate AI initiative. And, there were a lot of things that were focused on K-12 undergraduate AI education. I had a very small, in the scheme of things, grant that was focused on putting together interdisciplinary teams of undergraduate students in order to create accurate, fun, educational content about AI for social media. And in addition to that, to do some research, sort of needs assessment for AI education for young people. Part of the motivation behind this was that a lot of young people, especially teenagers, for example, do a lot of informal learning on social media. And this becomes really important when, in the United States, at least, a lot of schools, K-12 schools, high schools, still don't have NECS classes. And so it's not necessarily clear where students would learn about AI from a sort of computing perspective. And so, if they're doing a lot of informal learning on social media, how do we make sure that there's good content?
For informal learning, I guess what are the potential dangers of that, or what, in terms of motivating the work, what is at risk, or what is maybe the problem statement that you were trying to solve?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of hype around AI on social media. I think there's a lot of overstatement about AI and its capabilities in sort of both directions. Whether you're talking about how AI is this like completely evil thing that's going to destroy the world, or AI is going to like change everything tomorrow. Neither of these things is entirely accurate. There's a lot of, I would say, sort of myth making around AI on social media, or just like not a ton of what I would call like direct sort of educational content. There's a lot of how do you use AI, less about how does it work, and less about its limitations.
Right, and I think we're living into some of the hype cycle. We had Emily Bender and Alex Hanna, this week, it's still launch week. And we were talking a lot in that conversation about hype, and something that I'm really interested in as maybe one of the first generations that grew up on the internet is how we play into that hype for folks who are growing up, for teens and youth. And it sounds like your work was starting to unpack that, or the plan was for that work to start unpacking that and help support youth in getting the information that they need. What happened?
So about 3 weeks ago, I got an email near the end of the day on a Friday informing me that this grant had been terminated by NSF. Actually, first, I got a text message from our department chair that said, "Casey, I'm so sorry. I just saw the email. Let me know if you want to talk." And I didn't know what it was about.
Wow. What a way to find out.
Yeah, I was actually, I was traveling. I was visiting UC Irvine, and I got that text message like when I was on my way to dinner with some folks. So at least I had, some other professors to talk to about over a glass of wine over dinner. But ironically, I had literally just been telling someone about this grant, maybe like literally 15 minutes before I got this email. And the email came from my university grants office. I was not contacted by NSF at all. They sent a list of grants to the university that had been terminated. Mine was one of 11 that were terminated on that particular day.
When we're thinking about grants, for folks who are not maybe aware of how academic grants work or how much maybe money is involved, when we're talking about, this is the NSF, so the National Science Foundation, and these grants, say 11 grants, were probably worth a lot. Like, that's a lot of funding, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to guess, mine was, so this was, my grant was a type of NSF grant called an EAGR, which is an acronym. And the first word is exploratory, but I can't remember what it stands for.
And then there's 4 other letters.
Yeah, exactly. They're sort of intended to be maybe a little bit outside the box, or like high risk, high reward, but smaller, kinds of things. So this grant was only about $250,000, complete and counting overhead. It was for 2 years. And just to give you a sense of the kinds of things that an NSF grant might pay for, in this case, so as I mentioned, this was about creating social media content, doing sort of needs assessment, but also a big component of it was the idea of putting together these groups of students with different types of skills and knowledge. So the idea was that there would be like communication and media production students who would be really interested in content creation and thinking about how to communicate things, and also like information science and computer science students who know about AI. And the idea was like, the comm students will learn about AI, the computer science students will learn how to communicate, the world will learn about AI, right? And so a big chunk of the money was actually going to go to stipends for the students who were participating in this program. Another component of the money would have gone to a PhD research assistant to help run the program. And honestly, that was the biggest chunk. Like, between those two things, there was, a little bit of travel money as needed, a little bit of, equipment money if we wanted to like get a camera, but it really wasn't very much. And I actually had, and a little bit of summer salary for me too. And I'd spent almost none of it. I got the grant partway through fall semester. So it's too late to put a PhD student on it for that year. And so I'd been working on it. I'd been working on some of the background stuff, thinking about what kinds of content. I'd been developing a survey that I was planning to develop for K-12 teachers. And then for the past, at that point, for the past 5 weeks, I had been running a small pilot program with a small group of information science majors. We had been meeting once a week. We'd been brainstorming. They'd been drafting content. We were sort of trying this out to see how it worked. I hadn't even paid them yet because they were being paid at the end of the semester. And so when the grant got taken away, I actually couldn't use it to pay these students. And so thankfully, CMCI, the college, like stepped in and paid their stipends. But I can't use any of the money for anything else. So I basically like get a pay cut because I'm not getting summer salary, even though I've been working on this grant for 6 months. I don't have the money for stipends, so students can't do it next year. Even if there's been some like bridge funding that has been proposed in various places that I could apply for, but part of the problem as well is that even if I had the money for stipends for students, without being able to have a research assistant to help me run the thing, I mean, I would basically have to do it like teaching another class for and so, yeah.
So it sounds like the money predominantly, I'm just highlighting this point.
Yeah.
Underlining this point. The money was going to students, right?
Yes.
Like the money was supporting students to do important work in the world. So I guess my question, what I'm, one more like kind of fundamental context question is for folks again who don't really know how grants work, and especially the timeline of grants, and really I'm getting at how much work goes into creating a grant and research that goes into creating a grant. Could you just very quickly go over the process of creating this grant, maybe even the timeline of how grants work?
Yeah, so you have to write a proposal. And writing a proposal for a National Science Foundation grant is certainly no small amount of work. I will say for this particular type of grant and eager, it goes through a slightly different type of review process at the NSF, so it typically doesn't take as long. But it still did take a pretty long time this time. I think I submitted the grant and the proposal in March of 2024. And then I heard in August of 2024 that I got it. So like right before, right as the new semester was starting. And yeah, so, and I mentioned like I'd been working on it and summer salary and that kind of thing. Like the way that, one bit of context. Most like research faculty are paid on a 9-month salary, since we're not teaching over the summer. And so one component of this is the idea that if you are doing funded research projects, that like some amount of time over the summer sort of represents like your labor on this grant, in the same way that like paying a research assistant during a semester represents their labor. But of course, it's not like the professor doesn't work on the grant all year and only works on it for those 2 weeks. It's just sort of an accounting kind of thing. So just to explain what I was talking about there.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. And I think the question that I keep asking myself is why these grants? And so I'm sure it's speculation, but why do you think that your grant was targeted at this time to be defunded?
Yeah, so I can only speculate, but I feel pretty confident in this educated guess. So when I first got the notice about the termination, I was shocked because it was this grant. Mm-hmm. I have another National Science Foundation grant. I have a career grant, and it is about technology ethics. And I wasn't like actively worried about any of my grants, but I really thought the one that was AI workforce development, which is like what it was framed as, I really thought that one was safe. I mean, I've had grants in the past that 100% would have been gone right away. Like, my former student, Brianna Dim, the NSF grant that funded her was 100% broadening participation. It was, how do we get more women and queer people and people with disabilities into computer science? Like that one, I would have expected to be gone right away, right? But AI workforce development. And so I was baffled. And my first theory was I went and looked at the Dear Colleague letter, like for the program, and I noticed that one of the ways that it was framed was inclusive education. And I was like, oh, that's it. They got rid of every single thing that was funded under that program. So I contacted the program officer, and he confirmed for me that that was not the case, which is great. I'm very glad. But then, the news reports started to come out about this set of terminations that all happened on that Friday. Mm-hmm. And there had been an explicit message from Doge about...
Still can't believe that we have to say that with a straight face on, but yeah. About how, or a statement, I saw it through Doge, but it might have come from the White House. But anyway, there was an explicit government statement that research around misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation had been determined to no longer, serve NSF priorities because it was an affront to free speech. Which also and I was like, well, why did and then I went and looked at the public abstract for my grant. So I talked about the motivation for the grant earlier, right? So the public abstract for this grant has a sentence that says, something along the lines of, a lot of informal learning for young people takes place on social media, which could potentially be a problem with respect to AI education because there is a lot of myths and misinformation about AI on social media. So that is my educated guess as to the reason. Do you have a sense of why? So misinformation seems, from my academic perspective, as something that is bad, right? Misinformation and disinformation seems like something that we should take out of the internet. So what's going on? Why would that be something that people would want to get rid of or target? Because it seems different than the DEI grants being targeted. This seems like a different category.
Yeah, I mean, but it's still an ideological thing. I mean, as I'm sure you know, for many years there have been complaints that social media, for example, is biased against conservatives. And one of the ways that this comes out, or this perception comes out, is around combating misinformation on social media. So, for example, Oliver Hameson's paper on disproportionate content removals, which is a great paper, by the way, everyone should read it. They did a survey of people about having content removed from social media. And, they looked for, what demographics of people had content removed disproportionately compared to everyone else. And there were 3 groups, and it was Black users, transgender users, and conservative users. But the difference was that when digging into the reason why people had content removed, Black and trans people would talk about, what seemed like inappropriate removals. I was talking about my experience with racism and it got flagged as racism, or, people were harassing me and I clapped back at them and it got, reported for bullying. Whereas the conservative users in this survey talked about how they had been flagged for things like misinformation, and they weren't, and they were disputing the policy, as opposed to that they weren't necessarily disputing that they'd done something wrong, if that makes sense. And so there is a difference between having content removed for no reason versus there actually being a reason. And one of the things is that people can't disagree about what constitutes misinformation sometimes.
Sure.
I mean, there's certainly, disinformation is intentional. So in theory, the people who are, sharing disinformation know that it's incorrect, but misinformation can be, people who are duped or gullible or confirmation bias, these kinds of things. But there is definitely a widespread perception in some circles that combating misinformation is a form of intentional censorship. And so that's the deal. There's, this perception that anything that is trying to keep people from spreading misinformation is just a form of censorship.
It seems like, from where I'm sitting, canceling academic grants specifically on misinformation and disinformation is also a form of censorship. So taking what's happening on with conservatives kind of out of it, the conservatives feeling like we might be seen as like our content's being removed unfairly. It does seem like in your case with the grant that it's kind of a equal and opposite reaction to that. Is that fair to say?
Certainly seems logical. And I'll say based on the way that I described this, my grant and its little keyword not being about misinformation appears to be collateral damage, I would say. That said, I want to be very clear that the cancellation of the grants that were actually about misinformation is perhaps even more unjust, because, this is extremely important research. Mis and disinformation is a huge problem, especially given what's happening with generative AI. Just yesterday, I saw this video on TikTok that was and when I say clearly a deep fake, I mean that the content, it was obvious that it was a deep fake, but it was a politician's wife giving a speech. If I had not been paying attention, it looked very real. There were clearly people in the comments who thought, there were a lot of people who were also calling it out as obviously AI, but and scams and frauds. It's a huge problem. And even if you think back to Biden's executive order on AI, one of the components of that was executive orders in theory are the way they're supposed to work is that they're just marching orders for different areas of government to whatever's happening now is not what they usually are. But for the AI executive order, that is no longer in place because President Trump immediately got rid of it. But one of the things was hey, we need to figure out how to do watermarking. Go figure out how, NIST or whoever it was, go figure out how to do watermarking. That is an incredibly hard technical problem. There are a lot of really smart people working on how to do things labels and watermarks for deepfakes and generative AI. And I don't know this for sure, but my assumption is that is exactly the kind of research that got caught up in these cuts.
One thing that we were talking about before going live today that I've been thinking a lot about is that even President Trump is very clear. Let's go AI. Let's maybe deregulate AI, but let's AI and innovation. We're gonna bring it back to America, including education. We're gonna educate people so that they're better computer scientists and they can work with AI better. And yet you also have the function, the downstream impact of executive orders and DOGE and cuts for efficiency and grants that are immediately impacting students in the U.S., their ability to innovate or at least know about the capacities of AI so they can innovate. Does that resonate with you and how you're seeing this? And if so, can you say more?
Yeah, and I would think about this two different ways actually. So the first one is sort of taking me as an example. literally the week, like 5 days after my grant got terminated, President Trump put out an executive order about the importance of AI education in K-12.
Yeah,
like the importance, the AI education for young people. Like, I mean, the irony, I cannot. However, I have theories about that executive order, but I suspect also that the reasons that I think it's important for people to learn about AI are probably different than the reasons that the White House thinks that people should learn about AI. Like, the word limitations did not appear anywhere in that executive order, right?
Or ethics, presumably.
Yeah, it was exactly. And my despite sort of my typical work in the space, the work that I was doing for that grant was not explicitly about, I mean, it was going to be also about ethics, and most of my social media content on AI education is about ethics. But it was also very basic, like, here's what this is, here's how it works, here, but also, how to use it responsibly, and what are the limitations, and how do we think about things like environmental impact, and also, why does it get things wrong? That sort of thing. So there's that component of it, that just like the irony of that. The other sort of broader thing is that if we look beyond like the particular grants that are getting terminated, and my assumption is that so AI education is not being targeted. Mm-hmm. AI education is getting caught up in other kinds of things. So like there's my weird example, and my assumption is that it's also getting caught up in DEI cuts, because until very recently, the National Science Foundation cared a lot about broadening participation. Yeah. And so, there's a lot of broadening participation initiatives about, getting historically excluded groups education around AI. So my assumption is that those got caught up in it as well.
When you say broadening participation, this is actually a new term for me. Can you say more about what that is? Maybe the brief history around that? And like maybe who's using that language?
Yeah. So broadening participation in computing is that's a big term in computer science education specifically. I'm not sure if that's the term that's used in other STEM fields, maybe. But basically what it means is like, how do we increase the diversity of people who are studying computing, and then therefore in the tech industry working in this space. And NSF has, and broadening I do not the arguments against DEI. Also I think people don't know what DEI is when they're arguing against it, but like they're silly because they're assuming that the world that things are equal. Like they're it's the assumption that there's no problems out there. But oh my God, it's still so, even like me, as a woman studying computer science over many years, like maybe it's a little bit better today than it used to be. But if you ask like women in the tech industry, like what it's like, or like, women studying computer science, like you hear awful things all the time. Like the stereotypes and the harassment. There's just all kinds of issues. And this is true for a lot of historically excluded groups, and this is why they're historically excluded. So, there's been a lot of work in this space, and it becomes really important. And it's not just about like gender or race. Also things like socioeconomic status. There are a lot of programs that are intended to sort of help level the playing field a bit, and they've been pretty impactful. But even then, the percentage of women graduating with computer science degrees in the United States is considerably less today than it was in 1984.
Wow.
I don't know how deep you want me to go into this, but I can give you the short anecdote for why that is.
No, go for it. That's kind of a shocking statistic for me.
So in the 80s, because the computer as a person, used to be women's work, traditionally, and by the 80s there were actually a fair number of women studying computer science. There's this great book, Unlocking the Clubhouse, that was based on some research done at Carnegie Mellon in the 90s. And so the theory that comes out of that book in part was that in the 80s, the rise of the personal computer, and the way that it was marketed, personal computers were marketed in part, like in terms of hitting children, as partly toys for boys.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And if you look at there's, I made some TikToks about this and found an old Apple commercial that's like a little, anyway, it's very clear that how these were being marketed, right? This is a cool thing for your son. And so what ended up happening was that by the 90s, when students went to college, the boys had been using computers for years. Mm-hmm. And the girls had not. Mm. And so they were already behind. And there was this sense that this isn't for you. This is a thing for boys. And that was already having such an impact by the 90s that women studying computer science were dropping out at much higher rates. And this just kept getting worse for a while. So, in the 80s, I think it was at 34%. It's a little, it got down to I don't know, 19 or something. And now it's up a little bit, but we're still in the, I think last time I looked, low 20% kind of area. Issues around, people pretend there's not anything happening here, but you still see walk into particular areas at a tech company and there'll be one woman working there. You get to certain levels of computing classes and there'll be a couple of women students in the room. These kinds of things matter. So again, this, and it's not just gender, same kinds of things for other historically excluded groups as well. And there's been a lot of research in this area that actually has been quite impactful. Like I said, the percentages have started to sort of creep back up. We're also seeing a lot of work on, different types of informal learning. And it's also not just about how do we get middle school girls to care more about computer science? It also becomes how do we support people through the entire pipeline? Mm-hmm. When we're thinking about the DEI grants and those being defunded, what do you see as the impact of that on some of the sexist histories or presence in computer science education, if you see a connection between the two? Yeah, I just really don't want to see us move backwards. And honestly, this is what all of the hits on DEI is doing. It's moving us backwards. And actually, here's a statistic that I saw. I bookmarked this and haven't dug into it yet, but I saw a LinkedIn post where someone had looked at, and I'm guessing, so there's been a lot of open forms for people who've had grants terminated to fill out. Yep. About what. So I've done 3 of these. So I guess someone looked at the data from these, and surprise, surprise, the PIs of the grants that are being terminated are disproportionately people from underrepresented groups.
Do you think that's because of their identity, or do you think it's because those folks were more likely to study things that we're in those topics?
I think it's probably the latter. I mean, not that it really matters, but like, if you think about, actually think about something like AI ethics,
Sure.
and start
For
like,
example.
yeah, and start like naming like the big, like people who immediately come to mind for this. If you look like back on my bookshelf, you start looking at like tech ethics books, like the number of women of color compared to everyone else. And there are good reasons for that. But if suddenly you like cut all of the AI ethics research, it disproportionately impacts these folks, and what it results in is, more white men having research funding compared to other people. And that's basically what this analysis saw. And so like, so cutting this kind of research as well also like sets back particular people. And this becomes, the other thing about all of this, all of this is very upsetting. But we're thinking back to, again, like the importance, for example, of mis and disinformation research. It's not just the like immediate material impact on these particular PIs and this particular money. Like that's a big deal. But it also means that especially early career researchers aren't going to be doing this kind of research as much. And this isn't, and because if you need to get tenure someday,
Yep.
It's very hard to justify prioritizing research that is unfundable. And this is both because it can be hard to do research without funding, and because traditionally research funding is part of the evaluation criteria for getting tenure. And I actually just saw a message from someone working at NSF that was sort of encouraging academic institutions to remember that. This message was specifically talking about career grants, basically they were saying with all these cuts, because we also might just see cuts across NSF in terms of there being less funding. Like that is the expectation of what's going to happen. This is going to impact everything, not just DEI, not just misinformation, but everything. If you have less NSF money, that means less people get career grants, obviously. And if some academic units are using, were you able to get a career grant as a proxy for are you a good enough researcher to get tenure, then suddenly no one gets tenure anymore, which like obviously is untenable. But if people are worried about particular types of research, research on marginalized groups, research on climate change, research on disinformation, we're going to see less of that research. And this isn't, people being like selfish or whatever. It's like just survival.
You have to go where the incentives are, right? And if the incentive structure is so skewed towards not looking at that, like for me, I want to make a living at some point. But I want to go back to something that you're talking about, which is this relationship between the federal government and granting institutions run by the federal government and academia. So for myself, I am scared of staying in academia. And so me, as someone who has studied AI and was, going to start a job in which I was in academia studying AI, I'm like, well, no, I don't want to do that anymore, right? Like I either want to move to Europe to go study AI, or I want to, do what I'm doing now, which is more of like starting my own, businesses and doing consulting and all of that stuff, because I feel like a future in academia is very uncertain. And a scary prospect that there's something changing fundamentally in academia because of the funding structure. And so I'm wondering, this is a big question, but how you're thinking about it as someone who's further on in your career as an associate professor of the war on academia, we can call it, and is that even the right term to be calling it?
Well, and actually, if we go back to like your previous question about the sort of irony of the current administration thinking that AI is so important and all that, like this is actually the downstream effect there too. If you destroy academia in the United States, like we do not want to rely on just big tech to do foundational research. I mean, look at like, why do we have Google? We have Google because of a National Science Foundation grant.
Can you unpack that for folks who aren't aware of that story? Just very briefly.
Oh yeah, I mean the short version is that an NSF grant was funding some of the work of the founders of Google when they were students at Stanford. And this is frequently how things work. Like basic scientific research turns into much bigger things to the point where people forget sort of the roots of it. But what you just expressed, like I might, you might be scared to go into academia. You might want to go to another country. Huge. The brain drain that the United States is going to see because of what's happening right now is massive. And this is not just, so it's not just people like you deciding potentially not to go into academia. So that's one thing. Or wanting to go into academia, but there are no jobs because universities have no money. Yep. So there's that. There's also people like me who have been messaged by people outside the country like 3 times in the past month saying like, hey, we're hiring. Why don't you come to insert country here?
Yep. or companies, I imagine. Like if there is a goal or a plan to move academics into industry, I imagine that's something that folks are thinking about.
Yeah, that too. But I will say, like, there are countries that are being incredibly smart. Like, I think it's France is like, we're gonna hire them. And I've also seen, I've seen like 2 people, not in our field, but just like on social media or whatever, like just took a job at university. The University of Toronto iSchool is about to be a banger. Like,
I have looked into there's more positions going on over there too. I've been looking at this.
And that's really smart of them, right? I mean, it makes total sense. Like Canada's about to have, if things keep going as they're going, Canada, Australia, like especially English speaking countries are about to have like the best universities in the world. The other component is international students not wanting to come to the United States, which of course they don't. Look at what's happening to international students right now. So now really talented students across the world who might have come and gotten degrees here and potentially stayed here and gone to work for these big tech companies. So even if you think that all the work should happen at the big tech companies, I mean, this is the thing that I guess Elon Musk and Donald Trump are arguing about, right? Is like H-1B visas and these sorts of things. So like there are multiple levels of scientific brain drain in the United States that are likely to happen. And some of it comes down to immigration policy, but a lot of it comes down to like how are we treating our universities?
Well, so where would you like to see this going? And where do you practically see all of this funding situation going, say, in the next year or maybe in for the remainder of the administration?
I mean, how pessimistic do I want to be, really, right?
Well, that's your call. That's your call.
Yeah,
I'm on the pessimistic side of things, so maybe take the optimistic perspective, but be honest.
I mean, if like the cuts. Okay, so let's on the optimistic side, maybe these legal challenges continue to work, right? Maybe, a lot of universities have been appealing termination. Maybe my grant even comes back. Who knows, right? Like lots of universities have been appealing terminations. There's also been, basically legal challenges to like grants being cut, in the general, so maybe the cuts turn out to be illegal and current, things come back. And also the overhead caps also being challenged. Maybe that also turns out to not, that, it would be a very best case scenario right now. That is possible. The pessimistic side is, even if that happens, a thing that could happen next is that when Congress, does new budget that has NSF money in it, NSF funding gets cut by half. Mm-hmm. Like, I've heard that thrown around. I don't know how likely that really is. That then impacts not just like things that people think are bad, like DEI or whatever. It impacts everything. And not just NSF, NIH too. And now we're talking about medical research and this kind of thing. That kind, vote in the midterm elections, y'all.
That should be the takeaway from every single episode.
Yeah, vote in the midterm elections. Also, it's also local and like state. Where Colorado will have a new governor election soon. That's going to be very important, because as what's happening with the federal government, like states suddenly, I'm glad, our attorney general, who is Phil Weiser, who is someone that I quite like, is running for governor, but also he just like keeps suing the Trump administration. Is very unpopular with it right now. But this is the energy that I want, right?
Well, so in that worst case scenario, I'm paying close attention to the relationship between academia and industry, and then the government. So I guess you have three, kind of a triangle there. Do you see, if there is an absence of money coming from the government, do you see industry stepping in some way, or trying to hire researchers out of that?
So there's various ways in which this could happen. So there's the industry stepping up and like doing the research and hiring people out of academia and that kind of thing. And, that's good to some extent, but also like we have weird structures of power in tech, and especially around AI. Yep. And like, I don't like the idea of all the research happening that's so product focused, right? But you do get innovation that way, at least. The other thing is, will companies will tech companies step up to fund academics? Mm-hmm. So like Google, for example, Google PhD fellowships, Google faculty research grants. Jed has one. Yep. Maybe that, and also a lot of tech companies give money to like nonprofits who are doing, for example, my friend Ruth Farmer runs a nonprofit called the Last Mile Education Fund that supports low-income students who are trying to finish a degree in computing. She's gotten a lot of money from like Microsoft, Google, these kinds of places. But you might also have heard that the Boulder-based National Center for Women in IT has lost, they're funded in part by grants, in part by, donations and these kinds of things. They lost a lot of NSF money. And when you're thinking about something like a broadening participation initiative, given the sort of like fear around DEI right now, it might be that tech companies don't want to be seen like giving money to DEI initiatives.
Well, and most of them have also changed the language around anything related to DEI, or have cut it out completely. At least you can't search it on their FAQ or anything like that. Which is a broader process.
Yeah, and so then we come to like foundations, right? Like MacArthur and McGovern, and are like, they're gonna save us all, and like I hope they're gonna like step up, but there's only so much, right? Like, obviously the money that NSF has put into research is far, far more than like what McGovern has at their availability.
For just for reference, the Jed that Casey was talking about is Dr. Jed Brubaker, who is also a faculty over here at CU Boulder. Also happens to be my PhD advisor. So just for reference. As we move towards closing, I want to also highlight that you are a leader and a fountain of wisdom for youth, or shouldn't say youth, for college folks who are thinking about doing a PhD or do grad school or even advance their own career as researchers as undergraduates. How are you thinking about teaching them in this moment, or mentoring folks who are in academia and early in their career in this moment?
So I have a YouTube channel where I have a lot of videos with advice for PhD students, and I do live streams on YouTube, usually a few a year, like when we're in PhD admission season. And I did one like at the end of March or beginning of April, and I was like, oh my God, everyone's just gonna be completely freaking out about this, because so right now I'm talking about PhD students, and like one of the side effects of the funding cuts. So as I mentioned before, a huge component of what NSF funding pays for often is research assistance. Yep. So if universities don't have that funding, then that means they can admit less PhD students because they have to be funded. And if grants aren't helping to pay for them, then that means the money has to come from the university. And, like there's only so much. And so PhD students were having offers rescinded this past cycle. And also some programs like admitted less students than they usually do, or didn't admit any students, or these kinds of things. And this is a valid concern. Now, I was telling people before, like, maybe it's not so bad because some of this appears to be sort of preemptive, like it's programs being risk averse. Yep. But as we see more actual funding cuts, that might end up not being the case. Like it might not be preemptive. It might be based on actual funding cuts. So we're going to have this pipeline problem too. And then we also, of course, have the problem for folks who are at your stage in your career, like, where are the jobs? Yeah. Because if universities are concerned about, well, there's two things. One, if universities are just concerned about running the university because suddenly overhead is cut considerably, for example, they're going to institute hiring freezes. Also, postdoc positions are going to be cut, or like, anything that's soft money research scientists, anything that comes from grants, those jobs won't be there either.
Yeah, well, and you also have a double jeopardy in industry too, where you have a lot of jobs being cut under the premise of, well, AI can do that job anyway. So you have people who have spent years in computer science and doing AI development, and those jobs, I've heard from lots of colleagues that are more on the technical side, they're disappearing, and then a lot of folks are just getting laid off even before companies really know what they're doing with it. It's just, overhead is always the most expensive for a company. So that's an interesting tension that at some point some bubble is going to have to break. I don't know what that is or what that looks like.
Yeah, and I'm trying to. So I don't want to like suggest that this, like, don't go into research anymore, don't go into academia, don't apply for PhD programs. Like, we still, like, the work still needs to happen. Right? Like, like we need to keep going. It might be a little bit harder, and we might have to be a little more creative. You might have to consider other types of jobs. You be willing to sort of move between things. Maybe do slightly different types of research or frame research differently. But also, my expectation is that this is not forever. Mm-hmm. And I do think that some of this damage can be undone. Vote in the midterms.
and we have seen this historically before. There have been administrations, don't quote me on this fully, but I think even the Clinton administration, there were some cuts. And so this is unprecedented in some ways. But in other ways, there have been hits to funding before, and there have been some some bounce back from that.
Yeah, it will survive.
We'll see. Otherwise, I guess everyone will just move to Europe with that. We'll see. How I want to end. So Ezra Klein does this thing where he always asks for like what are 3 books or 1 book that people are thinking of right now. I don't just want to copy him. I'm wondering if there's any sort of song that you've been listening to or that you're into right now, which may be a more difficult question than books. I haven't decided yet. So if you want to go the book route, because I know you're an avid reader, you can go there.
I did just read the new Hunger Games book. I just finished
How was
it.
it?
It's actually very good.
Yeah.
I almost, so I don't know if this is, I gotta tell you, the first song that popped into my head, like in the context of this conversation, because you asked me, was Rat by Penelope Scott. And I'm just going to leave it with that, and people can look it up and find out why. That seems relevant to this conversation.
Yeah, I'll make sure to put it in the show notes for the podcast episode. And any last comments or thoughts before we close out?
Just, again, the work is important. What we're doing, whether it's AI ethics research or education or, misinformation, in the context of this podcast, things around deep fakes, DEI, et cetera, keep doing the work. And I do have hope that good people are going to continue to save us.
Well, and you're one of them. So I would like to thank Dr. Casey Fiesler for being on the show today. And we live stream this, which is very exciting. In the future, we'll hopefully live stream on YouTube, Twitch, if there's any AI related interest in Twitch streaming, which we'll talk to constituents about and followers about. But besides that, catch us at least weekly every week on your favorite podcatchers. And thank you for joining us today for AI Talkracy Live.